Welcome to the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Brian's a seasoned tax attorney with over 25 years of experience helping clients resolve serious tax problems, including audits, IRS debt, and tax court matters. Brian's based down here in Florida in Tampa, but represents taxpayers across the country and around the world in federal tax controversy cases. And today we're going to start by answering just a very common question. Who should you call when you're in trouble with the IRS? So Brian, so this is your first time with our listeners here. They may be meeting you for the first time. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and what led you to focus your career on helping people deal with the IRS.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm here in Tampa and have clients primarily in Florida, but around the country and even around the world. There's a lot of military people that kind of find themselves in a situation. Of course, they're stationed in different places and so forth. But I started out as an attorney doing primarily criminal defense work. Did that for a long time, dozen years or so, and then just kind of found my way into this tax work. I had a client that I'd helped on a criminal case, small kind of case, and he called me and wanted me to help him with a tax issue. And I said, I don't know anything about tax, and what are you asking me for? And he said, come on. And I said, okay, I'll look into it. And I don't even remember the specifics. It's so long ago, but got it worked out. And he was real pleased. And then not long after that, somebody else called me and said, hey, I understand you handle tax cases. And I said, who told you that? And he said, well, my friend, the so-and-so. And I said, well, what is it? So I started doing that. And I just kind of fell into it that way. But as much as anything, I enjoy it because a lot of it is, to me, it's kind of like solving, not really a puzzle, but just problems, legal problems. And when you start mixing the law with the facts and with the tax code and that, it's there's just a lot of interesting components to it. And I just really enjoyed it. So that's kind of how I ended up doing that. And I've been here in Tampa for 15 years now, doing exclusively tax controversy, which is, as you mentioned, debt resolution and also IRS audit work, usually for individuals and or small businesses. And with the IRS, a small business is defined as under $20 million a year in gross revenue. So that's the bulk of my work.
You know, Brian, there's so many terms that are in this field, as you were just mentioning before. So when someone does get into tax trouble, as I mentioned on the onset, there's so many professionals out there. There's a lot of confusion. I would love for you to kind of break these all down between CPAs, enrolled agents, attorneys. Break down some of these terms and who some of these folks are.
Okay. Well, a lot of people are familiar with these commercials that they see on television. They hear them on the radio, podcasts, help call 1-800 or IRS debt relief, IRS tax help, et cetera. And it's just kind of a ubiquitous type of tax commercial that you'll see out there. And they just have kind of generic names. And those are tax resolution services that are made up primarily of enrolled agents, because in order to represent an individual or a business before the IRS, you have to either be a CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled agent. Everybody knows what a CPA is, certified public accountant, an attorney, obviously, legal podcast, that's what I am, and enrolled agent. Enrolled agent is someone that's taken a series of tests offered by the IRS, has passed those tests, passed a background check to make sure that they're not some, crazed axe murderer or somebody on the lam or something. And all of a sudden they're licensed to represent taxpayers as well. And so if you see the clear distinction between the types of individuals that will find themselves either as a CPA, attorney, enrolled agent, each one brings something a little bit different to the table. But at its core, the tax code is a legal matter. It's something that involves the law. Yes, it involves accounting, but at the same time, always at its basis, it involves the law. So those are the three types that can represent individuals.
So Brian, expanding on that real quick, because you mentioned the differences, but what's the main difference between the CPA and the tax attorney when it specifically comes to dealing with the IRS?
Well, CPAs, by their training, are trained to prevent tax problems from occurring. Attorneys, by their training, are generally people that come to the aid of individuals that already find themselves in a bad situation, and not just with tax, but with all other areas that involve the law, everything from criminal law to family law to corporate law, et cetera. So most CPAs, while at least the ones I know very well, are excellent at what they do, which is primarily return preparation, and some type of tax planning, usually they're not that good at resolving a problem. They're good at preventing them, but they're not necessarily the best at resolving them. Enrolled agents, again, the requirement to be an enrolled agent, and I do have an enrolled agent full-time in my office, so I'm very respectful of enrolled agents. But their training is really just passing these tests, so they don't have to have necessarily an accounting or legal background to become an enrolled agent, but they can perform some valuable services, but they just don't necessarily have all the training and oftentimes the experience necessary that I do as an attorney. Because when people come to me with a debt issue, and I'm not talking, I owe the IRS $2,000. I'm talking people owing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. They'll say, well, I don't know. I'm going to call my accountant or this or my CPA or this or that. I said, let me explain something. What you have isn't a accounting problem. It's a legal problem. Okay. It involves accounting, but it's a legal problem.
Right. There's that crossover. People don't know about that switch right there. Brian, let me ask you, because people sometimes hear, they hear this phrase, this Taxpayer Advocate Service, right? Can you explain what they do and what they can't do?
Yeah, what they are is essentially the equivalent of like legal aid for civil matters, like people that are indigent or unable to afford an attorney, say for a divorce case or maybe a bankruptcy case, the types of situations that the Constitution provides for. They'll assist those people, and they are an arm of the IRS, although they are independent, and they are very good at what they do. Really, the distinction in many cases between what they do and what either myself or enrolled agents or CPAs can do is for every case I have, that particular taxpayer advocate may have 50 or 100 cases. So there's only so much time in the day. There's only so much you can do for somebody depending upon your schedule. So I would never say anything to impugn them. I don't use their services that often. If I do, it's usually because something is completely log jammed despite multiple attempts on my end to move things forward. But they're good. But again, if you want the kind of service that most people want, then going through the taxpayer advocate, you can just have to take a number and wait, because it can be a long, long time before things get resolved.
Brian, we were kind of explaining some of these terms and some of these roles and responsibilities. You're admitted before the U.S. Tax Court. First, explain to our audience what that means and how does it set a tax attorney apart from these other professionals when it comes to, like you said, the legal representation part of this. You've got a legal matter on your hands. You need legal representation.
Well, here's the fact of the matter. 99.999999% of tax problems are never going to end up in U.S. tax court. So people say, so what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is for that 0.0001% that might end up in tax court, I have the ability to take it to tax court, whereas a CPA or an enrolled agent doesn't. So going from the very beginning in the direct dealings with the IRS, you have a situation where they know if it comes down to it, if it really gets pushed in that direction, that's where it can end up, and I'm prepared to go into tax court with my client.
Brian, well, you just gave the percentages there, so big and so small. So, and so expand a little bit more on, like, obviously there's certain situations where a CPA or an EA makes sense. And then there's ones where like a tax attorney needs to get involved. Can you give some specific situations where obviously one's on the preventative side and then one's on the reactionary side?
Well, here's the thing. EAs, most of them are tax return preparers as well. As a point of reference, in order to legally prepare tax returns for another person for some type of compensation, you have to be assigned what's called a PTIN number. It's an acronym, and it's a number that the IRS will give out to pretty much anybody that asks for it. And so most enrolled agents, by definition, are return preparers. A lot of times they try to do the debt resolution work, tax controversy work, varying levels, degrees of success. I'll leave it to that. CPAs, a step above that. They are certified public accountants, are licensed. They are kind of the heavy hitters when you have the more complicated type returns. If you want to do some type of tax planning, estate planning, that type of thing, a lot of CPAs are good at that. So that's really kind of their wheelhouse. As I say, people will call and say, well, I have a tax issue. Most of my clients come to me, they already owe a great deal of money, or they're on the verge of owing a great deal of money. And most of the time they have some unfiled returns. So it's kind of a combination. They'll say, well, I don't know if I need a CPA. I don't know if I need a tax lawyer. I say, well, you need both. You need a CPA to do the returns, or in some cases, enrolled agent, if it's not that complicated. And you need a tax attorney to help you with the legal side, because in many cases you have a situation where sometimes it's on the edge. These cases could kind of go one way or the other in terms of how aggressive the IRS wants to be, or specifically who they want to get involved in the case. And by that, I mean, obviously, criminal investigations. They play a bigger role with the IRS, at least in the last 5 years or so, at least from my experience. They have gotten much more active.
So, Brian, someone's listening to this right now. Maybe they feel a little overwhelmed. They're unsure of who to call. You mentioned these professionals, right, in their different roles. What's the best piece of advice you can give them for figuring out, first at the onset, who they need and how to make sure they're getting the right help that they need?
Well, for some people, I've had people, it's not that often, but they don't owe what I would say is a great deal of money. And I don't mean to impugn somebody that comes to me and says, I have a large debt. Oh, it's huge. It's really big. I say, well, how much? It's $3,200. I mean, I'm never going to laugh at somebody or push them off and say, oh, come on. That's not, I mean, I can remember when $3,200 to me could have been $32 million. I mean, a lot of people have been there. So I don't ever discount the severity of somebody's situation just by the dollar amount. But as an attorney, I mean, I charge attorney fees. So if somebody says I owe $3,000, I mean, it may not be worth hiring me and paying me an amount equal or greater than what they owe to resolve something like that. But I've had a few people along the way that have decided to do that. But most of the time, it's a much larger amount. And so for people that say, I can't sleep, I'm worried that the IRS is going to come to my home, or they're going to show up at my business, or they're going to take my bank account, or do a garnishment, or accounts receivable. I don't know what to do. I say, well, let's look at where you're standing right now. What kind of notices are you getting? And usually when people call me, I'll oftentimes say, listen, if you can send me a copy of that notice, email it to me, or even take a text picture of it. Let me take a look at it, because IRS documents are government documents. And that means they're black and white and they're boring as hell. And most people look at it and their eyes glaze over and they see a number. But there's a lot of other things that are on these documents, different transcripts and so forth, that I can tell exactly where a case is in the collection process, because it's not as simple as looking at a balance due and saying, this is where I am. There are a lot of factors that go into how to resolve a case, depending upon how old it is, what the balance is, and whether or not there's something missing for that taxpayer. Because one important distinction with the IRS is if you have multiple balances, meaning multiple years, the IRS will not separately sort or manage or resolve separate years. You have to work a package deal, a kind of a one-size-fits-all resolution. So when somebody comes to me and says, I've got balances for the last 4 out of 5 years, but I'm missing a return from 3 years ago that I need to file, I mean, obviously we're going to take steps to put a block or hold on collections while we're getting the other return completed, and then we'll move forward. But it's a package deal with the IRS. So that's why when people call us, send me a copy of what you have, or if you know what you have, tell me specifically, because that's going to determine the best way to go.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for the time and insights and explaining all of this. We truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate everything.
And thank you to everybody out there for listening to today's episode of IRS Debt and Audit. If you're facing a serious tax issue and you don't know where to turn, Brian and his team at Tampa Tax Relief are available. Visit tampataxrelief.com to learn more. Be sure to leave us a like, review, subscribe to the show for more practical answers to the tax problems keeping you up at night. I'm Mike Leon. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.